Hello, this is Dave Hearn and Dick Yarmy. We're introducing episode 6 of the Photo Geezers. The topic today, Dick will introduce in a minute, but I also urge all of you to stay around till the end of it, and we'll announce the contest winner. So, Dick, maybe you can go ahead and
Sure. The concept that we've been following is to try to come up with a technique or an idea that possibly you could use in the upcoming 2 weeks to try. And the only reason I say try is it may or may not, whatever technique we introduce to you, may or may not appeal to you, and it may not work for you. It is not a mandatory thing. It's just one more tool in the toolbox if you're interested. Ernie Jenke, a great play on words, did this shot on Cherry Street, spelled Chairy Street. And it got both Dave and I very interested in the concept of forced perspective. And as you'll see in this episode, there's lots of ways to force perspective. But basically, what you're going to see, it's allowing you as the photographer to lead somebody through your photograph, to get them to pay attention to what you felt was the most important part. And Ernie's take on the chair here is a great example of using a wide angle lens at a close distance to force the perspective. And yet he's maintained the background parallel, et cetera, to lead us down the road, which makes, again, for a very interesting photograph. Dave has done a little outline on this, and he'll probably start us through it right now.
Yeah, basically, what we want to hit isn't an exhaustive list, and it's probably more of an expansive list than some people who want to talk about forced perspective would use. But these are different techniques that you can deploy in getting forced perspective. And what I would add to what Dick said is to me, a lot of times you're creating somewhat of an illusion. This is a compositional technique, but you're also kind of forcing the viewer to see things from a little bit different perspective. What we'll start with is talking about shooting angle. So you can shoot high or low, as in the next few examples. So, Dick, you want to talk about Natasha's picture?
Yeah, this is probably one of the best examples where Natasha has managed to do what in many cases with forced perspective is considered a cliche, when you take a small object and put it, an object close to the camera and another one behind it and merge them together. But by doing it within the pattern of the vines on the wall, she has made this illusion incredibly realistic, in that both Dave and I felt when we first looked at it that tree is growing out of those vines. It's just an exceptionally interesting way to force perspective and change. That tree is, I don't know how many feet behind that wall, but it's a long way back, I'm sure, because they're looking at the focus, and I think it's a full-size tree. But she's reduced it to the size of the vines and merged them together, not in a double exposure, but in one shot. It's just an excellent example of forced perspective, I think.
And by shooting low and up, she's able to achieve that perspective.
Right, enlarging the wall immensely, and of course shrinking the tree. Another example of having a small object, smaller obviously than the Chrysler building, close to the camera, and then using the building as a background. It's forcing, not a perspective you'd normally look at this statue. I think that's probably in front of the post office, I think, on 58th Street, New York. But just changes the way you look at things.
When you talk about shooting from high angle, of course, I'm here. This is in Patagonia, and I'm actually shooting at the edge of a ledge. That's some of the famous Patagonia mountains in the background. But what I want to call your attention to, if you can see my little magnifying glass, is right here. This is my camera. So I'm going to be shooting at down low, but shooting out across the water. And what we have here is, this is, as you can see, this is probably only, this rock is only about 1.5 feet high and maybe 3 feet across. But by putting my camera where I did, I changed the perspective to this, to where now this is that same rock I just pointed out to you that's only about 1.5 feet high, but now we have a different perspective on it and have created an illusion, at least I think there's an illusion of somewhat of a mountain in the foreground that I'm shooting from. So.
And the beauty of it is the consistency of shapes, and the repetition of shapes makes this an incredibly interesting photograph. And we talked in a couple of episodes ago about exploring your subject and exploring where you're working. This is a great example of awareness, of finding a rock on the ground that mimics the mountains in the background, and giving an extra dimension to the picture as opposed to a postcard view of a skyline.
The other thing that you can do, and is frequently done to change perspective, is you can either use a wide angle lens, and all smartphones are around a 28 millimeter focal length, which constitutes a wide angle lens, or you can use telephoto lens, which is a longer focal length, and you can alter the perspective of a picture. As we started out with, we had Ernie's picture, and again, look at the relative size of that chair versus the rest of the street. That chair takes up, what, 60% of the photo. And Ernie's shooting, again, a lot of times it's a combination of techniques, because he's also shooting from a very low angle. So it creates a nice illusion for that chair. You almost can kind of see somebody sitting on one of those giant chairs at a amusement park or something like that, where they get swallowed up. This is a Dave Barstow picture of obviously a plant hanger or something there in his front yard. This is shot with a smartphone, so it's a roughly 28 millimeter. It's a wide angle. And again, look what the wide angle does in terms of changing the perspective and the relative size of objects in the picture. Dick, you want to talk about this? This is a telephone.
Yeah, this is going the other way. This is using a long lens to compress the picture as opposed to stretching it out with a wide angle lens. Those numbered barns, 23, et cetera, through 30, those barns are basically the width of 2 horses, tail to nose. There are stalls on both sides of those barns, so as you can understand, that's 30, 40 feet. Times that many barns, yet it gives the illusion of a deck of cards or something that are very close together. Again, you're forcing the perspective to, and I guess the tree is probably another 100 yards behind that, behind the last opening. So it really changes the view because it's a binocular view. If you look at this with your human eye and both eyes open, of course, you don't get this compression. You would see much more normal view.
Yet another way of looking at focal length is panoramas. Now, this is a Sue Janke picture shot in Ireland. The normal, as Dick was talking, he talks about your eyeball. Normally, this is really close to what you actually would see with your eye if you were standing there in terms of width. It's probably 120 degrees across there in terms of width. Be equivalent of about of 11 millimeter focal length. So a panorama shows what the eye sees, but it's a different perspective because normally cameras don't capture that. So another way of altering the perspective in your photos is, and with iPhones and Samsungs, et cetera, it's very easy to shoot panoramas. And by the way, it's not exactly the way your eye, if you look at my plus sign here, this path I'd be willing to bet actually ran more to Sue's left than up the side of the photo. This is another panorama shot with an iPhone. I actually did this in Sicily. But again, now what we're doing is we're combining the expansiveness that you get in terms of close to 110, 120 degree view, but also using the fact that foreground objects appear quite large on wide angles. So the cacti and these other things in the foreground are quite large compared to what you see in the distance.
But it also, being a panorama, it also compresses. It's a very interesting technique because not only does it do what a wide angle would do, but it also does some of the compression of a telephoto by smashing the various planes together, right. Which is what makes them, to me, just jump out at you. Both of those panoramas are gorgeous.
But the point is, in both cases, it's a different perspective, even though it's probably closer to what the human eye actually sees standing there.
Yeah, again, we would not get the compression. We would see many more planes with the human eye, I believe.
So the next thing, and this is probably, if you were to Google forced perspective, the thing that comes up most often is people superimposing far and near objects, and really most of these work best when you're actually taking advantage of the fact that the camera is recording two-dimensional objects. So you're actually, what you're trying to do here is flatten things down between near and far, as in this example. Dick?
Yeah, that was in a museum, I think, in New York somewhere, but that just happened. I happened to see it. It wasn't staged. And, the humor in my mind was that, the statue was eating the people. But it's just a matter of moving right or left, as you're looking at this until it lines up properly and taking the picture. A lot of times people really work at it. I believe is it Sam or Marion? Somebody had a shot with the rainbow. It's exceptional.
Yeah, well, let me bring that one up right now.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to jump ahead.
That's okay. No, it's good.
Yeah. Where this, the old joke of the high school with the hill behind you and holding your friend in the palm of your hand has been done by 11 million people. But here was somebody that really thought this through. And if you look at the motto on her shirt and then relate it to the rainbow, this is an incredibly creative shot.
Now, this is Marion Ward's picture, and that's her granddaughter, Lily. So this,
beautiful.
To Dick's point, this is a little more creative in terms of tying, using the ability to change perspective and flattening everything down, but at the same time having an overall theme, and it adds a lot to the composition and overall picture. This is a Buzz Yoder picture, and again, this is an example of where having objects near, and then you've got the street out of focus but far, but you create an illusion of these two small figurines being hippopotami that are walking down the street.
Yeah, the street, even though the street was out of focus, it still works. You don't have to have them both in focus and superimposed to get the effect.
Yeah.
So this, and the shadow adds a lot to this.
Right.
The largeness of the shadow. This was just my attempt to really do the cliche of something close and something far away. This is just walking around campus till I can find an isolated tree, which is harder to find than you would imagine. If you know, and I probably should have cloned out those couple of leaves toward the edge to make it more believable. But you just and actually the peach is too close. I couldn't quite get it in focus. But it is the thought of a very small object relating to a very large object that's at infinity, and the close object is as close as you can focus the camera, or in my case, not quite as close as you can focus the camera.
You need longer arms.
Yeah. Yeah, it was handheld, but one hand on the peach and one on the camera.
So another perspective or way of getting perspective is using leading lines, and I would add leading lines to a vanishing point. Anybody who's, some of us are old enough to have taken mechanical drawing or drafting, and part of the techniques that you would learn in drawing houses and various and sundry other things was using vanishing point perspective, 1 and 2 point perspectives. So here we're kind of borrowing from the art world in terms of using vanishing points. This is a picture that I took down at the cemetery, and what I wanted to do is create this idea of just grave upon grave upon grave, and almost going out into off in the horizon. So, and also the way to get this was to shoot at a very low angle. Camera lens was probably only about 6 inches at most off the ground, the lens itself. So.
And it really makes the point, you know, which is the whole idea of any of these techniques is to make the point you want to make.
Yeah.
And one thing is you just keep shooting them, because just a word of the wise for people using cameras with like an SD card. If you didn't like it, don't delete it. Deleting single photographs can often corrupt a card, which is, and now it's a lot of money. So wait till you get home and, you know, use the ones you want and then format the whole card. It's just safer.
So the last topic is of creating a kind of an illusion or a different perspective is using reflections. This is an Natasha Kramer picture, and really what you've done is the same thing as we talked about a minute ago. You've got near and far objects, but the far object is actually the reflected tree in the water. So.
Again, this is like the vines on the wall. This is just an incredibly creative use of these two planes that are a great distance apart to combine into one photograph. It almost mimics double exposure kind of work, but done mechanically rather than laying one over the other. It's just really nicely done.
Yeah, I'm sure this picture could easily be confused with a double exposure. You would really have to stop and think, well, how did they do that? This is an Albert Spirith, I think it's Albert, reflection shot, and you can see the how again you've created this illusion almost of a double exposure with the pattern and the reflections, and reflections can easily alter perspectives, and it's a way of getting near and far objects together.
We also did a nice job holding the focus between the close-up object that is reflecting it and the clouds. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do. Yeah, and it would not be effective if either one was soft. And it's a self-portrait too, if you look in the.
Yeah. Well, that is true. This one was just submitted this last week by Marion Ward. Again, she's got a bulb of some kind, or it's a Christmas bulb or whatever, but she's gone out and shot a reflection into this colored bulb, and it comes out quite different. Nice illusion, a lot of depth to it. And she's also used a fair amount of negative space in it.
And it appears that the bulb, besides reflecting the scene behind her, is also, I believe, creating the highlight that the ball is sitting on.
Right.
I think it's serving as a reflector to kick down into that shadow and open up the texture on the table or cutting board or whatever it is. She's got a real twofer out of her main subject.
So that's what we were going to cover. This list I will include in the email when we send it out in terms of various techniques. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to Dick. And do you want to announce our winner?
No, you can go ahead. That's all right.
Well,
we tried to get him on live on the show, but he didn't answer his phone. I guess he's hiding from the fact he won. So.
Well, he doesn't know yet. So but what we did, we had a total of not counting Dick and I, 13 contestants, 2 of which requested they be not included in the drawing, and we put all those names in. I put them in the camera bag. Claire did not want to appear on video drawing out, but I had her draw out, and John Brown is the winner of the camera bag. So
congratulations, John.
So for next time, the assignment is going to be try to submit at least one image with forced perspective.
And if I could add one thing to that, if any of the other techniques we've covered in the last few weeks going up to this, combined with forced perspective, makes sense to you, please do it. Like Marion's that had the negative space as well as forced perspective. These things can be applied in any way you want. They don't have to be one at a timers. Many of the things that we've talked about, I think, can work together.
Yeah, and to Dick's point, and we want to underline this, is a lot of this forced perspective, you get the kind of stuff like this, which is cute and quite honestly gets on the internet, I think is way overdone. It is also a very serious compositional tool, and by using the idea of forced perspective, you can also create some very good fine artwork. So as Dick was saying, think about it as another compositional tool in your tool bag.
Yeah, the best example of that would be the Patagonia Mountains and the 3 foot by 1 foot rock. Making that a compositional tool to change the entire look of the photograph is the best example that I think we showed of how to use something as a real tool.
Okay, that ends episode 6, and we look forward to seeing the pictures coming in next week.
Thank you all for watching and your patience to do it.